Morning, guys. Picking up where we left off on Racing in the Rain. We are starting chapter 19 today, and where we left off was Eve had slipped and fell on a sunny day when Eve, Denny, and Zoe were at a park. She slipped and hit her head. They had to go to the hospital, and there at the hospital, Denny had his friend Tony take Enzo because, of course, dogs can't be in the hospital. So he went to stay with his friend. It was Mike, actually. Mike and then his partner, Tony. And they had washed Enzo's dog, and he surprisingly liked his dog nice and clean. He didn't think he would. So moving on, we're going to start with chapter 19, and we're going to read through chapter 23 today. That's about 25 pages. So go ahead and settle in and get yourself nice and comfy, and here we go. Chapter 19. I was not always included, being a dog. I was not always allowed in hospitals to hear the husband's conversations. To witness the doctor in the blue hat and the blue gown whispering his opinions or misgivings, revealing the clues that we all should have seen, explaining the mysteries of the brain. No one confided in me. I was never consulted. Nothing was expected of me, except that I do my business outside when called upon to do so, and that I stop barking when they told me to stop barking. Eve stayed at the hospital for a long time, weeks. Because there was so much for Denny to do, caring for both me and Zoe, as well as visiting Eve in the hospital whenever possible, he decided that the best plan was to start living by a system, rather than our usual spontaneous way of living. At the end of a workday, Denny retrieved Zoe from camp and returned home to cook dinner while Zoe watched cartoons. After dinner, Denny gave me food and then took Zoe to visit Eve. Later, they returned. Denny bathed Zoe, read her a story, and tucked her into bed. Weekends were spent largely at the hospital. It was not a very colorful way to live. My walks were infrequent, my trips to the dog park non-existent. Little attention was paid to me by Denny or Zoe, but I was ready to make the sacrifice in the interest of Eve's well-being. I vowed not to be a squeaky wheel in any way. After 2 weeks of this pattern, Maxwell and Trish offered to keep Zoe for a weekend, so as to give Denny a bit of a break. They told him he looked sickly and he should take a vacation from his troubles, and Eve agreed. I don't want to see you this weekend, she said to him. At least that's what he told Zoe and me. Denny had mixed feelings about the idea. I could tell as he packed Zoe's overnight bag, he was hesitant to let Zoe go. But he did let her go, and then he and I were alone. And it felt very strange. We did all the things we used to do. Went jogging, we ordered pizza delivery for lunch. We spent the afternoon watching a fantastic racing movie. After that, Denny took me to the Blue Dog Park that was a few blocks away, and he threw the ball for me. But even for that venture, our energy was wrong. A vicious dog got after me and was at my throat and bared teeth everywhere I moved. I couldn't retrieve the tennis ball, but was forced to stay close by Denny's side. It all felt wrong. The absence of Eve and Zoe was wrong. There was something missing in everything we did. After we had both eaten dinner, we sat together in the kitchen, fidgeting. There was nothing for us to do but fidget, because while we were going through the motions, doing what we always do, there was no joy in it whatsoever. Finally, Denny stood. He took me outside. He gave me my usual bedtime cookies, and then he said to me, "You be good." He said, "I have to go see her." I followed him to the door. I wanted to go see her too. "No," he said to me, "you stay here. They won't let you into the hospital." I understood. So I went to my bed and I laid down. "Thanks, Enzo," he said, and then he left. He returned a few hours later in the darkness, and he silently climbed into his bed with a shiver before the sheets got warm. I lifted my head and he saw me. "She's going to be okay," he said to me. "She's going to be okay." Chapter 20. Zoe and me playing in the backyard on a sunny afternoon. She made me wear bumblebee wings she had worn in a previous Halloween. She dressed herself in a pink ballet outfit with a puffy skirt and the leotard with tights. We went out into the backyard and ran around together until her pink feet were stained with dirt. It was the Tuesday after her weekend with Maxwell and Trish, and by then she had thankfully lost the sour vinegar smell that clung to her whenever she spent time at the twins' house. Denny left work early and picked up Zoe so they could go shopping for new sneakers and socks. When they got home, Denny cleaned the house while Zoe and I played. We danced and laughed and ran and pretended we were angels. She called me over to the corner of the yard by the spigot. On the wood chips lay one of her Barbie dolls. She kneeled down before it. "You're going to be okay," she said to the doll. "Everything's going to be okay." She unfolded a dishcloth that she had brought from the house. In the dishcloth were scissors, a Sharpie pen, and masking tape. She pulled off the doll's head. She took the kitchen scissors and cut off Barbie's hair down to the plastic nub. She then drew a line on the doll's skull, all the while whispering softly, "Everything's going to be okay." When she was done, she tore off a piece of masking tape and put it on the doll's head. She pressed the head back onto the neck and laid down the doll. We both stared at it. A moment of silence. "Now she can go to heaven," Zoe said to me, "and I'll live with Grandma and Grandpa." I was sad. Clearly the weekend of rest Maxwell and Trish had offered Denny was a false one. I had no clear evidence, and yet I could sense it. For the twins, it had been a working weekend, an effort to establish a plot. They were already sowing the seeds of their story, spinning their lies, foretelling a future they hoped would come true. Chapter 21. Soon, Labor Day weekend came, and after that, Zoe was enrolled in school. Real school, as she called it, kindergarten, and she was so excited to go. She picked out her clothes the night before the first day, bell-bottom jeans and sneakers with a bright yellow blouse. She had her backpack, her lunchbox, her pencil case, her notebook. With great ceremony, Denny and I walked her a block from our house to the corner of Martin Luther King Way, and we waited for the bus that would take her to her new elementary school. We waited with a few other kids and parents from the neighborhood. When the bus came over the hill, we were all so excited. "Kiss me now," she said. "Oh, kiss me now," she said to Denny. "Now?" he replied. "Not when the bus is here. I don't want Jessie to see." Jessie was her best friend from preschool, who was going to be in the same kindergarten class. Denny obliged and kissed her before the bus had stopped. "After school, you go to extended day," he said. "Like we practiced yesterday at orientation, remember?" "Daddy," she scolded. Denny said, "I'll pick you up after extended day. You wait in the classroom and I'll come get you." "Daddy!" She made a stern face at him, and for a second I could have sworn she was Eve. The flashing eyes, the flared nostrils, the head cocked, ready for battle. She quickly returned and climbed onto the bus. Then, as she walked down the aisle, she turned and waved at us before she took her seat next to her friend. The bus pulled away and headed for school. "You're first?" another father asked Denny. "Yeah," Denny replied. "My only. You?" "My third," the man said. "But there's nothing like your first. They grow up so fast." "That they do," Denny said with a smile. We turned and walked home. Chapter 22. It was an evening on which Denny took... Chapter 22. It was an evening on which Denny took me along to the hospital to visit Eve, though I didn't get to go inside. After the visit, Zoe and I waited in the car, while Maxwell and Trish joined Denny to talk on the pavement. Zoe was so immersed in a book of mazes, something she loved to do, and I listened carefully to the conversation. Everything they said made sense, but none of it added up properly in my mind. Maxwell and Trish did all of the talking. Of course, there has to be a nurse on duty around the clock. They work in shifts, but still, the one on duty takes breaks. So someone needs to be there to help. And since we're always around, we have nowhere to go. And you have to work, so it's best. Yes, it's best. Denny nodded with conviction. He got into the car and we drove off. When's Mommy coming home? Zoe asked. Soon, said Denny. We were crossing the floating bridge, the one Zoe used to call the High 90 when she was younger. Mommy's going to stay with Grandma and Grandpa for a while. Mommy's going to stay with Grandma and Grandpa for a while, Denny said, until she feels better. Is that okay with you? I guess, Zoe said. Why? It'll be easier, he broke off. A few days later, a Saturday, Zoe, Denny, and I went to Maxwell and Trish's house. A bed has been set up in the living room, a large hospital bed that moved up and down and tilted and did all sorts of things by touching a remote control. It had a broad footboard from which hung a clipboard. There was also a nurse, a crinkly older woman who had a voice that sounded like she was singing whenever she spoke. And who doesn't like dogs? Though I had no objection to her whatsoever. Immediately, the nurse started fretting about me. To my dismay, Maxwell agreed, and Denny didn't take notice. So I was shoved outside into the backyard. Thankfully, Zoe came to my rescue. Mommy's coming, Zoe told me. She was very excited and wore the plaid dress that she liked because it was so pretty. I felt her excitement too, so I joined in with it. I embraced the festivity, a real homecoming. Zoe and I played, she threw the ball for me, and I did tricks for her, and we rolled together in the grass. It was a wonderful day, the family all together again. It felt very special. She's here, Denny called from the back door, and Zoe and I rushed to see. This time I was allowed inside. Eve's mother entered the house first, followed by a man in blue slacks and a yellow shirt with a logo on it. He wheeled in a white figure with dead eyes, a mannequin in slippers. Maxwell and Denny lifted the figure and placed it in the bed. The nurse tucked it in, and Zoe said, "Hi, Mommy." And all this happened before it even entered my mind that this strange figure was not a dummy, not a mock-up used for practice, but Eve. Her head was covered with a stocking cap. Her cheeks were sunken, her skin sallow. She lifted her head and looked around. "I feel like a Christmas tree," she said. "In the living room, everyone's standing around me, expecting something. I don't have any presents." Uncomfortable chuckles from the onlookers. And then she looked at me directly. "Enzo," she said, "come here." I wagged my tail and approached cautiously. I hadn't seen her since she went to the hospital, and I wasn't prepared for what I saw. It seemed to me the hospital had made her much sicker than she really was. "He doesn't know what to think," Denny said for me. "It's okay, Enzo," she said. She dangled her hand off the side of the bed, and I bumped it with my nose. I didn't like any of this. All the new furniture, Eve looking limp and sad, people standing around like Christmas without presents. None of it seemed right. So, even though everyone was staring at me, I shuffled over to Zoe and stood behind her, looking out the windows into the backyard, which is dappled with sunlight. I think I've offended him by being sick, she said. That was not what I meant at all. My feelings were so complicated. I have difficulty explaining them clearly even today, after I've lived through it and had time to think about it. All I could do was move to her bedside and lie down before her like a rug. I don't like seeing me like this either, she said. The afternoon went on forever. Finally, the dinner hour came, and Maxwell, Trish, and Denny poured themselves cocktails and the mood lifted greatly. An old photo album of Eve as a child was taken out from hiding, and everyone laughed while the smell of garlic and oil floated from the kitchen, where Trish cooked food. Eve showered with the help of the nurse. When she emerged from the bathroom in one of her own dresses and not the hospital gown and robe, she looked almost normal, except there was a darkness behind her eyes, a look that she had given up. She tried to read Zoe a book, but she said she couldn't focus well enough, so Zoe tried her best to read to Eve, and her best was fairly good. I wandered into the kitchen where Denny was again talking with Trish and Maxwell. We really think Zoe should stay with us, Maxwell said. Until, Trish echoed, standing at the stove with her back to us. So much of language is unspoken. So much of language is made of looks and gestures. Trish's robotic repeating of the single word, until, revealed everything about her state of mind. Until what? Denny demanded. I could hear the irritation in his voice. How do you know what's going to happen? You're condemning her to something before you even know. Trish dropped her frying pan onto the burner with a loud clatter and began to sob. Maxwell wrapped his arms around her and enveloped her in his embrace. He looked over at Denny. Please, Denny, we have to face the reality of it. The doctor said 6 to 8 months. He was quite definite. Trish pulled away from him and steadied herself, sniffed in her tears. My baby, she whispered. Zoe is just a child, Maxwell continued. This is valuable time, the only time she has to spend with Eve. I can't believe for a second that you would possibly object. You're such a caring person, Trish added. I could see that Denny was stuck. He had agreed to have Eve stay with Maxwell and Trish, and now they wanted Zoe too. If he objected, he would be keeping a mother and daughter apart. If he accepted their proposal, he would be pushed away. He would become an outsider in his own family. I understand what you're saying, Denny said. We knew you would, Trish interrupted. But I'll have to talk with Zoe about it to see what she wants. Trish and Maxwell looked at each other uneasily. You can't seriously consider asking a little girl what she wants, Maxwell snorted. She's 5, for heaven's sake. She can't. I'll talk to Zoe and see what she wants, Denny repeated firmly. After dinner, he took Zoe into the backyard and they sat together on the terrace steps. Mommy would like it if you stayed here with her and Grandpa, he said. What do you think about that? She turned it over in her head. What do you think about it? She asked. Well, said Denny, I think maybe it's the best thing. Mommy has missed you so much, and she wants to spend more time with you. It would just be for a little while, until she's better and can come home. Oh, said Zoe. I still get to take the bus to school? Well, Denny said, thinking, probably not. Not for a while. Grandma or Grandpa would have to drive you to school and pick you up, I think. When Mommy feels better, you'll both come home, and then you can take the bus again. Oh, said Zoe. I'll come and visit every day, Denny said. And we'll spend weekends together, and sometimes you'll stay with me, too. But Mommy really wants you to be with her. Zoe nodded somberly. Grandma and Grandpa really want me too, she said. Denny was clearly upset, but he was holding it in the way I thought little kids didn't understand. But Zoe was very smart, like her father. Even at 5 years old, she understood. It's okay, Daddy, she said. I know you won't leave me here forever. He smiled at her and took her little kid hand and held it in his own and kissed her on the forehead. I promise I'll never do that, he said. It was agreed that she would stay. As the night wound down, I found Denny sitting on the stuffed chair next to Eve's bed, nervously tapping his hand against his leg. Denny, please. There was something about the tone of her voice, something pleading in her eyes that made him stop. Please go home, she said. He scratched the back of his neck and looked down. I don't want you to see me like this. Like what? Said Denny. Look at me, she said. My head is shaved, my face looks old, my breath smells bad. I'm ugly. I don't care what you look like, he said. I see who you really are. I care about what I look like, she said, trying to muster her old Eve smile. When I look at you, I see my reflection in your eyes. I don't want to be ugly in front of you. Denny turned away as if to shield his eyes from her. I'll pack Zoe's things and come back in the morning, he said, finally, without turning around. Thank you, Denny, Eve said, relieved. He kissed Eve goodnight, tucked Zoe into bed, and then he left. I was surprised when he left me with Eve. I hadn't realized I was part of the package. The house grew quiet and dark. Zoe in bed, Maxwell and Trish in their room with their TV blinking under the door. Eve was settled into her bed in the living room, with the nurse sitting in the dark corner playing a page of her word search book, in which she circled a hidden message. I laid next to Eve's bed. Later, Eve was asleep, and the nurse nudged me with her foot. I lifted my head, and she held a finger to her lips, and she told me to be a good dog and follow her, which I did. She led me through the kitchen, through the laundry room, to the back of the house, and she opened the door that led to the garage. In you go, she said. We don't want you disturbing Mrs. Swift during the night. I looked at her puzzled. Disturb Eve? Why would I do that? She took my hesitation as rebellion. She snatched my collar and gave it a jerk. She shoved me into the dark garage and closed the door. I heard her slippers tread away back into the house. I was not afraid. All I knew was how dark it was in the garage. It wasn't too cold, and I wasn't overly unpleasant, if you don't mind a concrete floor and the smell of engine oil in an absolutely pitch-black room. I'm sure there was no rats, as Maxwell kept a clean garage for his valuable cars. But I had never slept in a garage before. I restlessly bided my time. Hours into my nightmare, the garage door opened, and Eve was there in her nightgown, silhouetted by the nightlight in the kitchen. Enzo? She questioned. I said nothing, but I emerged from the darkness, relieved to see her again. Come with me. She led me back into the living room, and she took a cushion from the sofa and placed it next to her bed. She told me to lie on it, and I did. Then she climbed back into bed and pulled up the sheets to her neck. I need you here with me, she said. Don't go away again. But I hadn't gone away. I'd been kidnapped. I could feel the sleep pressing down on her. I need you with me, she said. I'm so afraid. I'm so afraid. It's okay, I said. I'm here. She rolled to the edge of the bed and looked down at me, her eyes glazed. Get me through tonight, she said. That's all I need. Protect me. Don't let it happen tonight, Enzo, please. You're the only one who can help. I will, I said. You're the only one. Don't worry about that nurse. I sent her home. I looked over at the corner, and the crinkly old woman was gone. I don't need her, she said. Only you can protect me. Please, please don't let it happen tonight. I didn't sleep at all that night. I stood guard, waiting for the demon to show his face, The demon was coming for Eve, but he would have to get past me first, and I was ready. I noted every sound, every creak, every change in the air. By standing or shifting my weight, I silently made it clear to the demon that he would have to contend with me if he intended to take Eve. The demon stayed away. In the morning, the others awoke and cared for Eve, and I was able to relinquish my guard duties and sleep. What a lazy dog, I heard Maxwell mutter as he passed me. And then I felt Eve's hand on my neck, stroking. Thank you, she said. Thank you. Chapter 23. 22 was a doozy. For the first few weeks of our arrangement, Denny and I lived in our house, while Eve and Zoe lived with the twins. Denny visited them every single evening after work while I stayed home alone. By Halloween, Denny's pace had slowed, and by Thanksgiving, he revisited them only twice during the week. Whenever he came home from the twins' house, he reported to me how good Eve looked and how much better she was getting, and she would be coming home soon. But I saw her too on the weekends, when he would take me to visit, and I knew she wasn't getting better, and she wouldn't be coming home anytime soon. At times that winter, all the extra driving around to make sure Zoe was where she was supposed to be at the correct time was very confusing to me, and I wasn't the only one confused, I assure you. For while Zoe was sleeping with the twins and Eve, they often called upon Denny to shuttle her to and from soccer practice or ballet or birthday parties. Sometimes Denny would receive a reminder call before the pickup time. Sometimes he received the reminder call after the scheduled pickup time, and that was never good. He would leap to his feet, throw on his jacket, and run out of the house at full speed, only to return later, scratching his head. "I'm sure they told me 5 o'clock, he would say. "I could have sworn they said 5. I know that sometimes his tardiness was due to his forgetfulness, and he was always very tired and sad, but it was also because of the extra hours he was working to make up for all the time that he had to take off in order to attend to Eve. One incident in particular drew the ire of Maxwell and Trish above all others. Denny was supposed to pick up Zoe from her ballet class, which he thought the dance studio was located at the strip mall next to Coal Creek, which, as you can imagine by its name, was not particularly a scenic place. That evening, Denny's car decided to stop working. He called Maxwell and Trish many times to alert them to his predicament, but alas, he could not reach them. Denny grew more and more frantic as the hour grew late. Finally, he called an orange taxi, which was able to come to our house immediately, and together we drove across the lake to retrieve Zoe. I went too, at the insistence of the driver, who was particularly fond of dogs, though he didn't own one himself due to the allergic disposition of his wife. We arrived at the dance studio over an hour late, and when we got there, Zoe was sitting on the pavement outside the building with an older man. Both of them wore jackets that were too light for the weather. "The teacher had to leave," the man said. "I'm the custodian. I told her I'd wait." Denny thanked the man, and as we three returned to the taxi, a dark SUV squealed into the parking lot. Trish jumped out of her car and ran toward us. "I got a call from another parent who drove by and saw Zoe sitting on the curb," she snapped at Denny. "Oh, you poor dear, you're absolutely freezing." She wrapped her own coat around Zoe, enveloping her, and she guided Zoe to the waiting car, where she helped her into her booster seat in the back. "What on earth do you think you're doing?" she hissed at Denny after the car door had closed. "My car broke down," he said. "I tried to call." "Well, you didn't try hard enough, did you? She's a little girl, Denny. She should not be left sitting in a dark, cold parking lot with a janitor. You should be ashamed." "My car. Then you should go and get yourself a new one. I don't know what's less dependable, the car or you. I am finished asking you to help with Zoe. Finished. She climbed back into her very large car and drove away quickly. We returned to our taxi and went home. This incident affected Denny very much, not because it wounded his pride, but because it interfered with his relationship with Zoe. You see, Denny missed Eve tremendously, but he missed Zoe even more. I could see it on most days when he kept Zoe overnight and we got to walk her to her bus stop. On those mornings, our house seemed filled with electricity so that neither Denny nor I needed the alarm clock to wake. Instead, we waited anxiously in the darkness until the hour came to rouse Zoe. We didn't want to miss a single minute we could spend with her. On those mornings, Denny was a different person altogether. The way he so lovingly packed her sack lunches, often writing a note on a piece of notepaper, a thought or a joke he hoped she would find at lunch and make her smile. The way he took such care of her peanut butter and banana sandwiches, slicing the banana so that each slice was exactly the same thickness. I got to eat the extra banana on those occasions, which I enjoyed. I love bananas almost as much as I love pancakes, my favorite food. I knew it was never Denny's intent to be late to pick up Zoe, but as on a racetrack, the reasons why never matter less than the facts at hand. And really, Trish was right. A little girl should not sit in a cold, dark parking lot for an hour with a janitor. Even Denny would admit that. And that's the end of chapter 23. Hopefully the next couple of chapters liven up a little bit and we get some good news. I'll see you tomorrow at our Zoom. Bye, friends.